Hi, this is Brennan Davis from Bedrock Games and the Bedrock blog, and I'm here with Joel Clark, and we're talking about Brave Archer 3. This is the third installment of our discussion of the Brave Archer series. This is a 1981 film directed by Chang Cheh, with action direction by Philip Kwok, Chang Cheh, and Lu Feng. It stars Alexander Fu Sheng, Nao Nao, Ti Lung, Lo Meng, Lu Feng, Sun Qian, and Ching Li. It also features vocals by Jenny Tsang in an important musical piece that plays during the middle of the film, and the movie is it's sort of the end of the first Condor Heroes book, basically. And in this one, essentially what happens is Huang Rong gets wounded by Iron Palm Sect, and they meet a woman named Ying in Black Swamp when she's trying to sort of escape the Iron Palm people. And she directs them to Reverend Yi Deng, who is the former emperor of Dali. And in order to get to Reverend Yi Deng, who can supposedly cure her affliction, they have to pass through his four guardians, the farmer, the woodcutter, the fisherman, and the scholar. And when they get there, they learn of a tragic backstory involving Reverend Yi Deng, Ying, and Zhu Batong, which we'll get into in the discussion. And there's a lot of drama. They end up sort of resolving things a bit, and then needing to escort Ying down the mountain to safety, where they have a great confrontation with the Iron Palm Sect and the Iron Palm Sect leader, played by Lo Meng. And so does that seem like a fair breakdown of things?
Yeah, that pretty much covers the whole thing. The devil is in the details with this one, because each one of those things you mentioned is in just by itself really fun and awesome. Really enjoyed this movie. So
yeah, how would you say it compared to the other three? Like, what's your favorite out of the three at this point? Now that you've seen, three of them.
I still think my favorite's the very first one. I think there was a lot of really great stuff that went on in that one, and our main characters were the most clearly the main characters in that one. In this one, I feel like much like the second movie, they're closer to spectators for most of the movie, and that makes them more of a framing device than characters, which I don't like quite as much. It's not bad or anything, but as far as like is this one enjoyable on its own merits? Oh yeah. There's a lot to appreciate in this one, and I actually think it's stronger than the previous movie. And that might just be because it's a little fresher in my mind, but I don't know. There was a lot to appreciate in this one. There's a really good dramatic heart to it. I really liked the characters. Some of them are really funny. Old Naughty shows up as young Naughty in a flashback, which is great. The guy that got to play him was extremely talented and a very good actor.
That was Philip Kwok, who's also one of the action directors and one of the Venoms from the Venom mob.
Yeah, he's a wizard. Like, the way that guy moves is unreal. Like, he just does these, like, he'll just casually leap over his own head and do a front flip and just keep walking. No big deal for me.
It's so effortless you almost don't notice it. It's you can miss it because it's just, to them it's just like breathing air. It seems like they're very graceful, the Venoms, and yeah. So he's a perfect Zhu Batong, because Zhu Batong is this insane character who's obsessed with martial arts and doesn't really understand all of the normal rules of propriety and social decorum, and so the big backstory we learn about him is that he sort of inadvertently had an affair with the I think the concubine or one of the wives of the Emperor of Dali, and this creates a scandal. But ultimately, the Emperor is this really magnanimous guy who, says, "Okay, you guys can get married." And Zhu Batong is like, "No, I don't want to get married," and he decides to leave when he realizes he's not going to be executed. But then later, it turns out that the woman Ying is pregnant and she has a baby, and Reverend Yi Deng has this Yi Yang finger technique, and there's an approaching battle that's going to occur on Mount Hua, sort of like a duel among all of the martial masters. And the leader of Iron Palm Sect decides to use his Iron Palm technique on the baby, so that Reverend Yi Deng will have to use this Yi Yang finger, because the consequence of him using the finger is that he loses his martial abilities for about 5 years. His internal strength is depleted, and so he won't be able to win the contest. And so Reverend Yi Deng is sort of put in this position where he has to choose: does he save the baby, the illegitimate son of not the illegitimate son, but the son of his wife, of his former lover's lover, or does he stay his hand and win the contest? And in the movie, it's a little bit unclear which direction he was going to go, but he hesitates so long that the woman ends up killing the baby. And
such a heartbreaking scene.
And
go on. It's presented in a way, because we had a movie with baby killing in it, and I was like, that was such a gut punch. In this one, though, it felt so like over dramatized and maudlin that I didn't feel it so much as a "oh no, the baby's dead" scene. Like the last one triggered my dad reflex really bad. This one didn't so much. I was just like, okay, like I get it. I get the drama. I get what's going on here.
Yep.
So yeah, it's still pretty heartbreaking, and it's especially well acted. There's a wonderful like frantic energy to the whole scene, which I don't know, kind of helps you move along past the whole "oh yeah, they did kill a baby, didn't they?" thing.
Well, and I think what makes it the baby is almost like a plot device in the scene. What really carries it, I think, is the grief of the Ying character. You really sort of buy into her. So one thing that happens when she realizes that the emperor isn't going to cure the baby is her hair turns gray, and then it eventually turns white, and just from the grief of the situation, and then she plunges a dagger into the baby. And so from that day on, she's sort of hell-bent on getting revenge against Reverend Yi Deng, who at this point isn't a reverend. He's still the emperor. And he leaves the secular world and becomes a monk, largely because of these events. He feels bad about it. That's his big character trait, is that he's really kind of trying to make amends. And we really see that in the Return of Condor Hero story, which, if we ever cover that material, we can get into. But yeah, so I don't know. What other parts of the movie did you like? What did you think worked?
Oh man. Okay, so the Iron Palm sect is really cool. I want to point that out. And I don't know if they're just cool because of their visuals, because they might be. It might just be that the fancy black and red capes and just going around shirtless and buff and punching into pots full of what is that, heated charcoal or something like that.
I don't know what that was, but it's a very interesting one.
Yeah, but like just something about their design makes them really cool. And I was really enjoying watching them. Their leader is exceptionally ruthless and also really blasé about his evil, which makes him a really kind of fun, interesting bad guy. And there's another really good fight with him in this movie that is really... Actually, the last fight in the movie is a showstopper. It's really brilliant. But especially the fight with him is satisfyingly gory and drawn out and cool. So there's a lot that's fun about them. I really loved... What was that like swamp they had to go through to get to Liu Ying, where it had all those like Taoist principles you had to know to go through the traps on the swamp. Yep. Like I loved that. That was amazing. A very D&D moment, or a very very role playing game moment. Because it's almost like you had Huang Rong succeed in her knowledge Taoism check or whatever, and she's like, "Oh wait, I know this."
It's actually quite amazing how much of this connects to role playing stuff so easily. Yeah. It's something that you really notice about it, and I think that's a good example. And also the what is it, the challengers she has to go through, the woodcutter, the farmer, those are great moments in the movie, but you could totally see them working in a role playing context as well.
Oh yeah, because like to get past her and to get to Reverend Yi Deng, they have to climb up a mountain, and like in every chunk of this mountain, there's a secret path, and a trap, and a guy guarding it, and like that's almost exactly a dungeon.
Yeah, and we'll definitely get into that. We're gonna cover the gaming stuff in a moment, but I think that some of the other things too that I really appreciate about this movie. Number one, like you said, the action choreography is great. I think this is
really
it's so effortless. And that's the thing that really stands out to me. But also, I mean, there's a lot going on. This is like, if you're not familiar with the story, it maybe is hard to appreciate. But Chang Cheh really does. Like, the more I think about it, he really did do a good job of of giving you a complete movie experience and also getting in, through careful, sometimes he has to adjust things to make it work, but just getting in all of the core components of this story in a way that, that fits an hour and 30 minutes or however long it's not that long of a movie.
It's really not. And there's a lot, you're right, a lot happens in this movie. And you don't notice it because you're so intrigued with every given thing that's happening, and that every scene is so very, like, it pops in your mind. It's very vibrant. Like, comparing it to a Western work, and even a more recent Western work, doing, like, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, this has got kind of a similar thing where you have a literary work that is so gigantic and so encompassing, and I honestly feel like Chang Cheh did a better job with this movie than Steve Jackson did with Return of the King. And that's a really weird thing to say, because I really like that movie. Mm-hmm. But this is at once, like, a lot of that movie blended together in a bunch of muted blue-gray meh to me. Yeah. There's a lot of that in Return of the King. This one didn't have that. Like, I can vibrantly remember every scene, and I greatly enjoyed watching each scene. And there was no less detail, no less characterization. I followed the characters no less. There was no less drama.
Yep.
And it's a fraction of whatever Jackson's budget was. It's just doing that balancing act like Chang Cheh was able to do is really fantastic as a director.
Well, I think the directing worked really well. I think it's interesting too that it's Chang Cheh, because this is really much more firmly in the Wuxia realm of things. And like Chang Cheh was doing all those sort of bloody kung fu style movies. And
you see the bloodiness come out in this one, though. He put this little trademark on it in that last scene where it was getting torn apart.
You do see the bloodiness, but he also does respect the wuxia genre. Like, you get that, and it's kind of interesting because a lot of his earlier movies were more wuxia in feel, and so it almost feels kind of like a return in some ways to that subgenre of filmmaking.
Like the Yi Yang finger especially was a very wuxia moment for me. Yeah. The hair turning white when it was to kill me. Like, those are very wuxia moments.
I do want to get into some other things, but what did you think of the Yi Yang finger performance when he's healing Huang Rong? Because I've noticed it's a very divisive scene, and some people love it, some people don't.
And that happened in the same room when I was watching it, because that's the exact moment my wife decided to come home for lunch from work. So I was there watching the movie. And so she comes in, and there's this guy standing there. And first time I've ever seen the scene, and then really dramatic music starts playing. Dun, 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 and he just kind of starts moving around. And a little factoid about me, I know a few steps to Tai Chi Chuan. I used to do that when I was younger. Mm-hmm. So for me, that's what it looked like. I was like, oh, dude, and I get what he's doing internally. Like, that's where the drama is coming from, is that he's, like, doing this really epically difficult, basically magic spell. And my wife immediately mocked it. She's like, man, that's some dramatic pointing he's doing. And I'm like, well, that's both extremes of reaction to this scene right now.
No,
so I enjoyed it greatly.
No, I definitely thought I think the scene worked, and I think one of the reasons why is the combination of the movement with the music. It's different. I mean, it definitely has a strong 70s vibe. This is an 81 film, but it's got a strong 70s vibe, I would say, that moment in the movie. It almost borders on funky, the way it's presented. But it really works, and I think... And also, T. Lung is the perfect guy to do it. Like, his height really adds to something to it. Do you know what I mean? It's like... Because a lot of times, like, when I think of Tai Chi, I might think of a movie like Tai Chi Master with Jet Li, who's got a much more compact, body type. But and that works with the Tai Chi movement. But this is interesting because, like you said, it's kind of got like a Tai Chi like visual to it. I don't think it's meant to be Tai Chi, but it looks a little bit Tai Chi.
No, it's not. The movement's too sharp for Tai Chi, but I mean, like, it's that same basic like Taoist movement principle.
Yeah, but something about his lankiness and the grace of the movement was worked really well. And that brings me into something else, which is I think the actors are really spot on in this film. It's beginning with Reverend Yi Deng, played by T. Lung. He really embodies that character very well. I don't know if do you recognize him from any other movies, or is he kind of a fresh face to you?
It's kind of fresh for me. Like,
okay.
I'm still getting the hang of this stuff. Have we seen a movie that has that character in it? Because I feel like it feels like an archetypical kind of thing almost,
I don't think we've seen a movie that's had Reverend Yi Dang in it, but we've probably seen one where T. Lung has at least made an appearance, though he might not have been I'll have to go back and see what movies we've done. But I mean, he's a very famous actor, and I think he really does a good job with these characters who have like there's something internal going on in their head that you're supposed to understand, and you can kind of read it through his eyes. He's really good at conveying that, and so I just really bought him as this former emperor who is now this compassionate monk and willing to die so that this woman can get revenge.
Yeah, like, he does seem haunted, and that comes through in his characterization of the character, which is really impressive.
And what's really cool, and I'm going to spoil a little bit just because I think it's so interesting, is Qian Run, the head of Iron Palm sect.
Yeah,
he is an important character in Return of Condor Heroes as well, and he and Reverend Yi Dang have an arc that continues into that story, which is really interesting. I won't spoil it more than that for you, but it's just a really cool direction that they take those characters. But also we have Alexander Fusheng, who, again, I think is a perfect Guo Jing character. He's sort of meant to be kind of a little bit of a simple guy, maybe not too bright, but sincere. And he really gets that. But also his martial arts are really great. He does a really good job with a lot of the movements. And, he's just nailing all of the moves that he has to do. And I thought Now does a really great job playing Huang Rong. I don't know what's your impression of Huang Rong at this point? You've now seen 3 movies of the character. Like, do you have an overall sense of what her character's about?
Yeah, I mean, like, she's got a lot of interesting training. She's very self-motivated as a character. Like, she does what she wants. She's very clever. I really love her almost impish kind of characterization through the movies. Like, I really like the character, and like I think she, to putting it in D&D terms, she's kind of like half thief, half wizard, sorcerer kind of thing.
Yeah,
because she seems to know like all this magical stuff, but she knows it in the same way she knows how to pick a lock or tell a really convincing lie. It's just in her arsenal of thief stuff.
Yeah, she's interesting because they highlighted in the movie her father's kind of this. He's not necessarily an evil guy, but he's definitely a little bit more sketchy than some of the other people in the movie, and he's got a little more of a kill at will type personality than say Hong Qigong or Reverend Yi Dang, but she's also a disciple of Hong Qigong, who's like this really righteous leader of Beggar sect, and so there's this interesting balance with her where she has a lot of unorthodox features as a character. She's not afraid to use her cleverness to deceive people in kind of sneaky ways, like the whole scene where they're going up the mountain and they're trying to get around the different challenges. She's being pretty deceptive. And at one point she even forces that guy to catch the boulder and just and he has to hold it in place so he doesn't get crushed, and that enables them to go up the trail. But she's still kind enough to send somebody down to rescue him when he once they get to where they're going. We also have Lo Meng as leader of Iron Palm sect, and you have Philip Kwok as Zhu Batong. And we also had another some of the other Venoms in there too. We had Lu Feng as the woodcutter and Sun Qian as the scholar. But I thought this movie, I felt like it sort of feels like in the second one Zhu Batong is the breakout character, and so in this one we just get way more Zhu Batong. Like that's not. I mean, they're just kind of doing the story, but if this were like a trilogy that they were making up as they go along, that's sort of the feel that it has. Is that Zhu Batong was so popular that we now need more Zhu Batong.
I like Zhu Batong. Like he's got a real Monkey King vibe to him, where like he doesn't really have malice, but he really does defy all social norms and expectations. So like that's a fun angle, and you don't see that a lot outside of Eastern storytelling. I find like there are a couple of like happy, talented fool characters in Western stuff, but like nothing that really approaches the scale of something like the Monkey King. So I think that if I had to draw a direct line between what inspired him, it would definitely be Monkey King Jubatong. Just because, like, even in this one, it's not just that he is kind of, like, sketchy. It's also that he's, like, ridiculously good at martial arts.
Yeah. Yeah, he's obsessive. That's his defining trait. He's obsessive about martial arts. And so he's kind of like he's the ultimate martial arts nerd. And he's so obsessed with it that he just doesn't notice things. Like we said, he doesn't, when he's being seduced by by Ying when he's at the palace, at first he mistakes her attempts at seduction as a martial arts technique, and he asks her, what technique is that? And he doesn't even. It's almost like he doesn't even realize that they slept together until his master brings it up later, and it's like, so wait, what did you do with her exactly? What happened? And it's like
martial arts. Yeah. It's the first thing he goes to.
Yeah, yeah. It's and the last thing he mentions is the important detail, and he just has no sense of the significance of what he's done.
And like later on, when he goes to apologize to the emperor. Jubatong's just like, yeah, okay, sorry. Ying comes in, and the Emperor's all like, okay, well, look, let's resolve this so that no one loses face. You can marry her, and it'll just be it'll reflect well on me. I'll be magnanimous. You guys will be in love. Everything will be fine. And he's like, I don't want to get married. F that. You can just kill me instead. That's cool. You're gonna kill me, and she's like heartbroken and he doesn't get that. He's not being maliceful. Yeah. He's just
he's hurt. He hurt everyone in that scene. His master is beyond ashamed by the behavior of his disciple.
Yeah, you can see it in his face, like, oh my God, what have I done?
Reverend Yidang has made this incredible gesture. I mean, it's just like it's a remarkable gesture that he makes.
Straight up insults him to his face in his throne room.
And like you said, she's heartbroken.
And he's just like, la la la, well, no one's gonna kill me, I've gotta go, bye. And you still can't hate him because he's just so feckless,
And he literally cartwheels out of the scene. Like he just leaps into the air, flips, and cartwheels his way out of the scene. And it's and again, in an American movie it might look a little bit silly, but in this kind of film, characters are performative in that way sometimes. And it I don't know, I like that you can get a lot of the character personality through the physical movements. There's something nice about that. That residual from like Peking opera and stuff is present. It works, and as long as you sort of get what it's trying to convey to you.
I don't really see it as any more egregious than Indiana Jones swinging into a scene on a whip or Batman falling through a skylight. There is a link between a character's action and their characterization.
Yeah, I think what I would say is different in these movies is I don't know, we don't know, like, I don't feel like I'd see a character, unless it was a Jim Carrey movie, I wouldn't see a character backflipping because he's happy or something. You know what I mean? But in a martial arts movie that's totally serious, you might see somebody do a backflip because they're happy. And I just feel like the boundaries for physical expressiveness through action are a little more permissible.
I will grant you can express more emotions in a movie like this than just I'm cool or rad or anger or something like that. Yeah, I think that American movies suffer from this onus of trying to be too cool all the time sometimes.
Well, and monotone, like you said with the Lord, and it's not necessarily an American movie, but like the Lord of the Rings thing, your chief complaint was it all looked like the same color, right? Wasn't that your criticism? And,
yeah, that is a cheap complaint, granted, but I mean, it's a valid one. That wasn't very visually interesting.
And I think we have an obsession with tone consistency in a lot, and I'm sure there's plenty of examples that go counter this. But I mean, a lot of times I feel like there's too much attention is paid to tone consistency, which can result in something that's a little bit dull. Whereas here, we're allowed a variety of tones, and everything still kind of pops and is memorable to you. Do you know what I mean?
And it doesn't do so in a way that's garish or hyper-stylized. It just seems like a natural thing.
Yeah.
It's really nice.
It's like you can, and again, what I like about this kind of movies, you can kind of go in and you kind of get like a broad, it hits a lot of buttons over the course of the movie, and you feel like you've had a complete experience. And you really see that with a character like Zhu Batong is just an unusual character to and I think again it gets back to sort of some of the stuff you were talking about, which is how the costuming like I think at one point you were saying, well, you liked a lot of the characters, and you don't know how much of it was just the way that the character was standing and the costumes and stuff. But those are totally reasonable hooks to use to tell you about a character. Like, it's a visual medium, so why not rely on costume and music and art and all these things that can kind of enhance that moment?
Oh yeah, like not to hyper saturate this with RPG talk, but that's one of the reasons that I always like get really skilled artists with my stuff, like because there is a visual dimension to the wuxia genre that is really important.
Yeah,
that's why like the manhwa, like Weapons of the Gods, like the comic book of that, is so striking and fascinating to me. Like I've heard people mock it as like Chinese superheroes, and I'm like, what's wrong with superheroes? It is like a superhero comic, and there is a strong visual appeal to it.
Well, and also if you read the source material, like the fight scenes in the book, some of the fights in these books go over a chapter. Like they'll go over a chapter or two sometimes. So it's it's not like they're just. I mean, it's not always following exactly what happened in the book, but it's not like they're just adding in gratuitous fight scenes for the purpose because it's now a visual medium and they want it there. It's part of the genre that the fighting is definitely part of the genre, and it just happens to work really well on screen because fighting is it's enjoyable to watch. So but we probably should get into the role playing stuff because I think we've hit that point in the show, and I guess maybe for the first thing that we can talk about, because you mentioned this and this really intrigued me. We were talking about Yi Yang Finger. And you were saying how that's kind of a Vancian thing, and I thought that was an interesting observation.
We should like define Vancian for the benefit of those who have no idea what we're talking about.
Well, and first let's define Yi Yang Finger first. In the movie, he uses it as a healing technique. It's a much more comprehensive technique, I think, in the books. But it's this technique he uses to heal Huang Rong from the Iron Palm attack, and the result of using it is that he's depleted for 5 years. He can't use. I think he can't use his internal martial arts or something. He's basically less effective as a result, and that is kind of a Vancian. It's a very long scale Vancian. And and again, for those who don't know Vancian, that's the casting system in D&D where sort of fire and forget. You get a certain number of spells per day in each level, and you memorize specific spells, and when you use them, they're gone for the day until you memorize again. And it operates on a similar principle.
Sorry, I was actually yawning.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah, and you're right. It operates on a similar principle, and actually, it's a principle that's gotten a lot more traction recently in 5th edition too. I was noticing this as I ran a 5th edition game a couple of weeks ago. I was noticing as I was going through the magic items to populate this dungeon, I was like, it has a specific effect. You get a certain number of times in a given day. Mm-hmm. So everything is kind of linked to that Vancian system where it's a resource management system is what it is, and it allows you to give players, especially with the way it kind of links and stacks, it allows you to give players more and more versatility and power as they become more powerful as characters. So it's not just like in this case, Yi Yang Finger would be like this ultimate super powerful spell that you can only use once in a very long while. Traditional Vancian is linked to what's now called a long rest, where you go to sleep and you wake up and you take an hour to prepare your spells. This one, like you were pointing out, is on a 5-year time scale, and it's not just he has to wait 5 years. He has to train every single day for 5 years to get that power back. It's like an enormous undertaking. So there's no reason you can't take the genius of that like resource rationing system and put it on different time scales. Like you could have one that refreshes in minutes so that you can only use something a few times in a battle, say. And as a matter of fact, 4th edition did something similar to that with its encounter powers, where you got to do this once per encounter and then you were out. But that leaves you with an interesting choice as a player, because it's like, when do I fire my big bullet? I've only got one shot.
And and I think the challenge of applying it to fighters is so Vancian magic is keyed to something that's actually going on in the setting, which is this memorization thing that you're doing, and sort of I mean, there's an explanation of it in the different DMGs of how it works. It varies a little bit from edition to edition, but basically you sort of, if I recall, you imprint the spell in your mind, and when you cast it, it kind of evaporates.
And this is explicitly magical effect.
Yeah. But then when you try to apply that to physical actions, it can get a little more thorny because some people have trouble with the, okay, I can understand how I would do that with a spell, but I can only punch this guy once every X number of things.
Special punch once an hour? That's not how punches work.
But,
and that's unfortunate because we've linked that to reality. That isn't how punches work.
But what's cool here is with Reverend Yi Deng's Yi Yang finger, the ability is Vancian, but the Vancianness of it matches exactly what's going on in the setting. That 5 year of rest is related to the mystical martial arts that he's doing and sort of the principles of how, this technique is supposed to work. And I think that's the cool thing about having, in Wuxia, a lot of the martial arts are mystical in nature. They're related to sort of the flow of qi through your meridians, and there's theory behind them of how you need to do certain things in order to empower them. And I think that opens the door for a Vancian style martial arts approach that actually makes sense. I mean, it's not, again, you might have to set things. 5 years might be particularly long, though. I think that's pretty cool. Because the thing that was cool about setting it at 5 years is the ability can be almost anything, because the guy's got to wait 5 years before he can use it again. So
yeah, and then there's even a bigger onus on, okay, I can only fire this bullet once every 5 years.
Yeah,
that's great.
So it could be extremely powerful, but it's balanced out by the fact that you got to wait 5 years between uses, and so if you use it on the wrong thing. And that's exactly the dilemma he was having when the baby came. Am I using this on the wrong? Is this the wrong moment? And not just that, but the fact that he's totally depleted by it. That's the other factor. It's not just that technique. His martial arts ability is completely depleted. But with a little bit of again, if the challenge of trying to turn something into if you're trying to make this sort of a D&D thing or whatever, is that you are. You're trying to work within the D&D system. So if you're trying to make Yi Yang finger Vancian, you might simplify it and just have it be related to the Yi Yang finger, not have it be as total. It's a little more compartmentalized in D&D. In this case, it was more encompassing. Yeah, because it covers a lot. And it might just be easier to just say, okay, you can't use Yi Yang finger for however many days or weeks or months. But that's also another interesting idea, would be scaling up the Vancian system so that instead of having it be operating on a daily principle, it can operate on monthly or weekly or yearly. I actually think that the higher level spells would be better balanced if they did them that way. Like, whenever you as a wizard get a point where you can cast Wish every single day, campaign's over, Well... That's a whole other discussion. I might not agree with you 100%, but I would. But here's the thing: I would want to do my due diligence in that discussion and actually make sure that I'm. You have to pull a 15th level campaign in Beckme to make that happen. Oh God. Well, again, that's another thing. A lot of those arguments will come down to the edition that you're using too. Like different editions have different rules governing them. I do remember in. Oh, go ahead. You're very right on that, because in the editions I play, Wish is so expensive that it's almost not worth doing. Yeah. It's not just you get it every day; it's you get it and it takes the wealth of a kingdom every time you use it. So it's like, okay, well, that's have a more limited utility. Yeah, and there are penalties to it too. There you suffer consequences. Yeah, big time. And then in third and 3.5, that's not the case. Yeah, you can just do it. But I remember it in second edition, and I remember at one point one of my characters did get Wish, and it was actually not as I was really looking forward to it, and it turned out to be a much bigger pain in the ass than I had anticipated. And so once I got to that level as a player, and again it's a little harder when you're coming at it from the player side, because you just want the Wish to work. But I felt very constrained by the parameters, so it seemed pretty balanced to me. But I have to admit, Wish isn't something that came up a whole lot in most of my campaigns. So it's not designed to, really. Yeah. But another thing that I thought was really cool, and we mentioned this, was the Guardians around Reverend Yi Deng, and how he had these men who were disguised as or retired as sort of regular people, a fisherman, a scholar, a woodcutter, and a farmer, and they all sort of prevent people from getting immediate access to Yidang, largely because I think they're concerned about this woman seeking revenge against him. And the challenges were interesting because they were somewhat martial, but not really. One of them involved climbing up a tree to its head, and that gave Huang Rong some opportunities for some specious logic to and another one was just there were two vines, and it was selecting the right vine, and again they were able to exploit knowing which one was the wrong one and trapped to get the guy to sort of end up in a situation where he was now carrying a boulder above his head. And but then there was the scene with the scholar, which was just really more of like it was a really good example of how you can use stuff like poetry contests and battle of wits as in place of a martial duel. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, like that. That's so hard to do too, because like it really was very much Huang Rong versus the scholar in a battle of knowledge, and that really isn't something that is well abstracted into die rolls like a martial contest is. It's a lot better if you simply have more data in front of you as a player, and you can just like pick and move things around. It's almost like a chess match kind of, except one person doesn't have all the pieces.
Well, it's one of the reasons why you might want to bring in real world knowledge into a fantasy setting. Like, unless you have like my game has a Confucius analog, but I don't have like an Analects book that I've written that contains all of the. You know what I mean? It's not that. I mean, there's a paragraph of information on the sayings of Kongji, but there's not something that's as extensive as the actual Analects. So I think. Sometimes what you might want to do is just bring in the real material that you're basing something on. That way you could make it it could become something that people draw on. Another thing you can do is, I think that's also a space like where allowing players to be a little inventive is okay. Do you know what I mean? Like
the Legends of the Wulin book actually straight up advise you to make up sayings from the great sages. They're like, but the Analects is gigantic, we don't expect you to read that to play the game. It's fine if you want to make something up, because there's a lot of obscure stuff that guy said, and it makes you seem clever in character. That's probably the best way to do it.
Yeah, and I think the measure of it, that's where the GM role can come in, because if the player is the sort of the competition they're having is one part of the competition has more to do with sort of riffing on poetic verse, but the other part of it has to do with how much knowledge they have of the sayings of Confucius. And so in a setting where you have like a fantasy version of that, just having the players come up with something that sounds like, the challenge is the player has to come up with something that sounds plausible. And if it sounds plausible, then the GM can be like, yes, that passes muster and you succeed. And if it doesn't sound plausible, then that would be the failure zone. So I think that's one way to do it. Another way, you could just have it resolved by dice rolls related to knowledge skills. I'd be tempted to use die rolls as a tiebreaker, where it's like, okay, I don't think that's particularly convincing. However, your character is very clever, so roll some dice. All right, well, there you go. I think either approach is fine. I personally prefer the approach that leans on the role play, but I mean it's one of these things where I don't think there's a right or a wrong way to do it. I think both I've done both approaches, and they both can be fun, and it's really about knowing the group. If I have a group, like I have one player in one of my groups who's astounding at coming, like who can just sort of creatively invent stuff like that on the fly, and it'll work like magic. But not everybody's is interested in that, and so I'm pretty flexible as a GM. But either way, I think this scene, it's I don't know, it's a great example of how, like, just within the culture, how these fights don't all have to be about people crossing blades. They can be about two scholars sort of staring each other down in the same way that duelists do. Like it's very dramatic. They're up on, there's like a log bridge that they're both standing on, and he's blocking the path, and he even raises one leg in the air and blows his fan dramatically. but all he's doing is coming up with poetic verses. It's not like he's actually fighting her. It's very gentlemanly and interesting,
it's something like you don't expect to see that sort of thing. I think whenever people like come into like what we call a kung fu movie, wuxia movie, what have you, they really have a set of expectations. And one of the things I think that we need to abandon in a lot of ways is that set of expectations. Sure, there's going to be some cool kung fu fights, but you don't have to adhere to a very strict template with it. As a matter of fact, it's desirable if you don't. As you get cool things like these scholar fights where they're just trading quips back and forth and things like that.
No,
a lot of times, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, a lot of times I see people kind of wed to the idea that everything will be resolved in the same way, and I think that kills a lot of the reason that you would do things in a genre at all, you know? Like, if everything was going to be a sword fight where I roll my sword die and you roll your sword die and I have a bigger bonus, so my sword beats your sword, that kind of robs it of the texture, you know, the variety.
Well, there's a lot more to it. It's a much deeper genre than people realize. And also, it was a living genre. Like, Gulong was famous for bringing in other elements to his stories. And he even said something to the effect of the genre will die if we don't bring in, new ideas to it. So he was always drawing on other sources, often American ones and often English ones. And one of them was actually the James Bond novels, believe it or not. And I recently read Casino Royale because I was interested in how James Bond might have impacted Gulong. And I was very surprised. I was like, oh, you know what? Like, a lot of these spectacular devices that Gulong had in his books, maybe that seems like it might actually be coming from James Bond. And some of the ways that he describes action, I can sort of see how he's drawing on the James Bond story and the thrills and just the types of characters that he likes to have. And that's not the only source of inspiration, but it's just one among many that influences novels. And I might be wrong on some of the details, but definitely there's an impact that it has. And I think that what's surprising if you watch enough wuxia is how it reaches into other zones over time, and it's the worst thing in the world kind of is a stale wuxia movie. Like a wuxia movie that's just all wuxia tropes is a little bit dull. Wuxia movies that do more interesting things or go into other areas or what's engaging. So I think you're right that when you're making a wuxia campaign, it's this weird balance where you obviously want it to feel like wuxia. You don't want it to be, you don't want people to suddenly think that they're in another genre. So you do need to root it in some of the fundamentals, but being willing to throw other things in can really breathe life into it, and it can get you. It can avoid the problem of we've been doing wuxia for 5 weeks and I'm already bored. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, it helps to keep it from getting like styad or predictable, and you don't want it to be predictable.
Yeah,
you always want to be able to surprise your players, and like if you only have a limited like well of things that you are allowing into your imagination, you're not going to be able to do that. You have to find something else. You have to go out and read Western or watch like a gory horror movie or something. And like we've watched movies like that where like there's these gory horror elements and trapped dungeons and weird devices, bizarre magic and all this stuff that fits wonderfully whenever you just change it just a little bit to fit within the wuxia genre. So, and that stuff makes games interesting. It makes continued storytelling a lot more dynamic and a lot more surprising, which is a richer experience as a player. It's more satisfying creatively as a GM. It's just better. And
another one that I thought was a really good game moment, and you mentioned it during the earlier discussion, is the Taoist formation in the swamp, where where there's like these little stones under the water, and they all sort of follow the Taoist principles, and if you know them, then you can find the stones. And I mean, it's a really cool scene because it's a very atmospheric black swamp with a little residence in it that Ying lives in. She's kind of an old reclusive woman, and there's all this mist hanging over everything, so you can't really see under the water. So it's very difficult. And the peril is they're being chased by Iron Palm sects, so they have this threat of Iron Palm coming after them, and they've got to sort of navigate this thing. And Huang Rong's knowledge of Taoist magic and Taoist principles is what enables her to guide Guo Jing over it. And I used something like this in one of my own games. I simplified it greatly. Well, I had a player who understood Chinese, and so I had these stones, and some of the stones were trapped. When you landed on them, various traps would attack you. The stone would explode, or something would come flying at you. And if you landed on the safe stones, you were okay. And and you basically are trying to cross over this section of the dungeon, and it was like a row of, I think, 4 by 20 stones, and the way that they were positioned made it somewhat difficult to navigate. But I wrote down the Chinese characters on every one of the stones, and essentially what it was you needed to follow the path of yin. If you followed the yin characters, you would make it, so characters that represented yin concepts, you would be able to safely get across. If you stepped on any of the yang stones, you would have an explosion or something. And so, if I were to, and obviously not every campaign is going to have a player who understands Chinese. So if it were a regular campaign, I might have just had pictures of yin and yang objects, and and once and that would be how they would have navigated over it. But it was a similar idea, and I drew it directly from this. That was the source of inspiration for it, and it ended up working out really cool, because I remember when that moment happened, suddenly the player who knew the Chinese was very interested in solving this puzzle, and and so it worked out pretty well. But yeah, so the other thing that I thought was worthy of mention was the dramatic backstory, and knowing when to deliver that to the players. Like in this movie, you like you said, the dramatic heart of the movie is that backstory, and that's kind of the center of the film structurally too. The middle of the movie is really oriented around this backstory, and that can be challenging to do in a role-playing game, but if you can do it right, it really pays dividends, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Especially when it comes to like backstories that inform character actions that aren't really intuitive. I think a lot of times I'll, as a GM, like if I don't have a backstory for a character, I'll just kind of fall into the trap of just having them behave kind of rationally, like, oh, they'll just pursue their interests without much risk. And that's totally acceptable. That is how people work in a lot of circumstances. But it's whenever a character takes really peculiar, like unintuitive actions that players become interested in them.
Yeah.
And those are usually informed by having a backstory, which makes those completely reasonable actions for them to take. For example, whenever we meet Reverend Yading in the movie, like one of the first things he does is they give him the this blanket, and it has something on it. And this dramatic song starts playing, and he's like, "Oh, it's this blanket." And they're like looking at each other like, well, is that important? And he's like, not now, but it is important, but not now. Your friend needs healing. And then without hesitation, like he just goes and he uses his super magical once in 5 years finger to heal this girl. And like all of his students come up over to Guo Jing, and they're like, hey, he's doomed. Like for the next 5 years he's weak now because he had to use his finger on you. And like so they're both like, why did he do this? And he's like, okay, sit down, kid, story time.
Yep.
And because they're completely interested in what is with this guy, what's with the blanket, why were you unhesitant in using your magic to heal her even though it depletes you, he gives them the backstory. And it's like, okay, this had a baby in it that was killed by its mother because I refused to use this. I kept my power selfishly, and it cost the life of this child. And you know what? I feel so bad about it. I'm cool with letting her just take her revenge. So I use my magic to heal you because I'm not making that mistake twice. And it's a really big info dump. Like, he gives them a lot, and it's a really rich, compelling backstory, but they're interested. So, and we're interested as the audience at this point. So it doesn't feel onerous. It feels really, it feels like a natural progression of the story and a good, well-paced technique for conveying the information.
And I think that's how you do it as a GM. You sort of deliver it to the players when they're interested. You know, like when they ask, or when it comes up naturally in conversation, when an NPC has a chance to say something like, well, actually, here's why this is the case. You know,
yeah, that was the magic word, was actually.
Yeah, that really can have a lot of impact. it's challenging. Like, you don't want to have 18 dramatic backstories that you have to memorize, but it can be handy to have one or two. Like, anytime I make a campaign, I try to come up with one or two significant dramatic backstories that might come up, might not. They don't have to come up. I don't really care. But when they do, the players really appreciate it, because they realize that this character has a lot more depth to them. Their motivations make a lot of sense, and wow, there's this really cool twist going on that sort of explains a lot of stuff that's been going on around us. And when it's done right, it works great. I think that the key thing to keep in mind is you're not going to always be able to pull it off the way it comes out in a movie. Like, he gets this opportunity to dramatically tell them the story. Sometimes you get that. Sometimes the players say, "Hey, what's up with that guy? I really want to know." And the NPC can explain. Sometimes the stories come out in fragments over time. I've had in my last campaign, there was a dramatic backstory involving, like, it was kind of like a burning of the temple type story, like where there was a sect that was extinguished, and there was a bad guy involved, and one of the people who survived was one of the player characters' mothers, or two of the player characters' mothers. And this was also a surprise to the player characters, because they didn't know that their mother was this great martial hero. And so slowly over the course of the campaign, they were getting all these little details that kept, oh yeah, your mom she actually knows martial arts. Oh, she used to be a member of this sect that was exterminated by this guy. And oh yeah, that guy, he's a really nasty person. Don't go in here. And it just kind of slowly came out. And then there was this other guy they were traveling with, Iron God Mung, who was very respectful to them and sort of took a shine to them. And it turned out that he was this person who was, in his earlier years, infatuated with their mother, and one of, almost like a young disciple of the mother character. And so you can use it to sort of, if you, what I would say is, as complex as the emotions and the motives were, the backstory was fairly simple here. It was a love triangle that resulted in a baby, and the baby was murdered by this evil sect, and as a result of the injured baby, Yi Dang had to make, like, the most horrible of choices, and it resulted in this lifelong grudge. And that I wouldn't take it any more than that. I think that's about as complex as you need.
You're right, it doesn't have to be complicated. Most great dramas aren't complicated. They just involve one or two really hard choices where there's not really the no-brainer good option.
Yeah.
There wasn't, It's hard to say, okay, I'm going to save your baby's life, even though it was born out of wedlock and in a humiliating circumstance for me, and also I'm going to give up my ability to compete and win all this honor and glory for myself in this really important tournament. Yeah, I'm only going to do that. I'm just going to jump right on that. I mean, like, it tore him apart. And he hesitated just long enough that, the mother was just like, you know what, I know you're not going to be able to bring yourself to do this, so I'm going to spare my kid the suffering, but you're going to pay.
Well, and
Wonderful.
he spends 2 books trying to make up for this. This is like his character story. This plays out over the long haul. But I think this also shows about motivation. Motivation. I mean, all you really need, you need the motive and you need the why. And those are the 2 things that are really crucial here. If you have that motive, then if you imagine that Guo Jing and Huang Rong are player characters in this, when they pivot in a particular direction and Ying is in the scene, if you clearly know what her motivation is, you know what she's going to do. If you don't have a clear understanding of her motivation, it can make it harder to make the decision. And in this case, she just really wants revenge against Yi Dang, and she wants it because of the death of her baby and her heartbreak over Zhu Batong. And if you understand those 3 elements, you can point her in the most logical direction based on what's going on fairly easily. And so I think it's really useful to get that out in shorthand in your NPC entries.
Oh yeah, because again, whenever the characters encounter her for the first time, it's not clear why she helps them, because she seems reluctant to at first. Then she's like, oh, I know who can cure that injury of yours. Yeah. If you as a GM understand that she wants revenge, and that by advising the characters to go and have Master Yi Ding use his magic finger on her will weaken him and allow her to get the revenge, that all makes perfect sense. But you as an audience member and you as a player in that circumstance wouldn't have known all those things, so they would naturally have been mysterious to you. And so that backstory is like, oh, we just fucked up, huh? That's a wonderful moment for players, and they're like, oh, okay, didn't know that before. Oops.
Yeah, and again, I think we might have mentioned this in the podcast, but just the way that the backstory changes your viewpoint on a lot of, like Zubatong, you look at him differently when you learn all this. Ying you look at differently. Yi Deng you look at differently. That can be a really powerful technique in the context of a role-playing game where you have either an NPC that's been annoying them or thwarting them, or that they really like, and they learn this information that kind of recasts some of that. It's I find it's one of the most effective ways to of drawing players into like a real friendship with an NPC or into a real situation of enmity with them. It can be really effective. It just has to be used lightly. You don't want to just be pulling the dramatic backstory all the time on people, or it'll lose its punch.
Yeah. Again, it's a rare spice. You don't want everyone to have some horrifically dramatic backstory. You only really need one or two characters to have a dramatic backstory, even in the course of like an entire campaign, like you mentioned, because like usually they're powerful characters that are sort of unavoidable because of the size of their power.
Yep.
You get a reasonably powerful martial artist like Yi Ding, like no one else can do what he can do. So there's something that draws you into his circle, his drama, just because you need him for a pragmatic reason. Well, I'm going to die if I don't get his magic finger, And
keying different NPCs into the backstory is helpful. If it's just one person, it's not going to have the effect that it had here. We have three people with three very different points of view about what happened. It really helps. It makes it possible for the players to get the information from all three people and maybe get slightly different takes on everything that happened. But yeah, I think I don't know. I think number one, I think that we've now seen all three. Maybe we'll go into Brave Archer and his mate. You and I can talk about that. Honestly, I think we should do the Bride with White Hair next, though. I think that
we should probably have a break. I've been kind of itching to watch Bride with White Hair anyway. So.
Yeah. So we'll probably end up doing Bride with White Hair next. But I think these three movies are great fodder for role playing. I think that there's a lot of stuff you can draw.
Yeah, having seen these three, I'm now even more intrigued about playing in Wandering Heroes, because now, I know that this is what informed those games. I've been putting off getting a core book because I'm like, my finances, but guess what? I've got student loans coming in next month, and I've earmarked about $50 worth for getting that book. So this is going to happen. I'm going to be able to actually talk about you in a oh, you designed this rules way with your stuff. So I'm very intrigued. Well, very excited.
Well, how about that? We can talk after the pot, but I think if we'll get you a copy. We'll get you a copy. And so, but yeah. Oh, by the way, before I forget, I do want to mention I do have a book out called House of Paper Shadows that I just put on the RPG Now. It's available in PDF. It's a haunted house Wuxia adventure. I think it's really good, and I think people who want to know what I mean by Wuxia Dungeon might want to check it out. Obviously, I'm biased. I think everything I put out is at least decent, but this one I think is a cool Halloween atmospheric module, and it's $7.99 in PDF. The print version will be out in October, and
nice. You are underselling it, by the way, guys. It's not for real. Talking to the audience here, it is not just a little place with some spooky ghosts in it. It's a freaking kung fu mega dungeon of tremendous horror and actual dramatic impact. It's fantastic. I've been reading through this thing. I'm aching to run it, not just in his game, but since it's a dungeon, pretty much in any game I can squeeze it into. I'm not kidding, Brendan. It's amazing. It's a nexus for this evil kung fu organization. It's got its own inbuilt adventure, and in addition to that, it has this living, thriving horror kung fu dungeon environment based on one of the stone circle city thing. It really is mind-blowingly good, guys. Not joking. And this, again, I'm not even associated with Bedrock Games outside of this podcast. You owe yourselves the House of Paper Shadows. It really is worth the cost of admission. So
well,
yeah.
I appreciate the kind words, and I think I'll try to revise my marketing strategy a little bit and do more overselling. But no, I hope people check it out, and I think it's definitely worth looking into if you like martial arts, if you like wuxia, and you like horror. But I think fittingly, The Bride with White Hair, it's not quite horror, but I think that's going to be a very fitting next topic for discussion. I'm looking forward to your reaction to it, because it's a very different wuxia movie, and I don't know how you're going to respond. I really don't. Nobody ever reacts to it the way I think they will. So I'm interested to see how you react.
You ought to write down what you think my reaction will be and put it in like a sealed envelope so we can dramatically open it.
But the thing is, that's the point. I don't know. I have no idea. Like I'm struggling to come up with a prediction, and I can't.
It's even more intriguing.
I hope you like it. I think I mean, I like it. Obviously, I think it's a good movie. But I remember I showed it to a bunch of people for a Wuxia Weekend podcast. Some of them liked it. One of them really, really didn't like the way it ended, and had an interesting reason for why he felt that way. So I'd be curious to see what your response to everything in the movie is. But I won't color your opinion more than that. And
okay.
And yeah, but we've been going on for an hour, so we'll head out. And yeah, so again, it's Brave Archer 3. It's a 3-part movie. There's also Brave Archer and his mate, and then there's an additional film that gets into the sort of like there's 4 or 5 movies depending on how you count them. But I think the only ones you really need to see are 1 through 3, and then it's best to encounter the Return of Condor Heroes material elsewhere, in my opinion. So anyways, we will let you go, and we will talk to you later.